and what's relevant there. So, but that's one of the big things that I'm noticing changing.
Why do you think that is?
Part of it, I think, has to do with wanting to make our writing more accessible. We don't always want to just write for that other professor sitting alone in their office, which hopefully is not.
More inviting.
Yeah, like undergraduates are being asked to read our work too, and we don't want you all to be like, this is the most boring thing I've ever read. I hate this author. I wish they never wrote this. But we want you to also be like, yeah, this idea is cool. It's really interesting, and I think I can use it, right? And so part of that means thinking beyond just a very narrow audience and thinking about, well, who's actually going to read this if I write it in a really, really detached, formal way? Right? So.
Just to piggyback on that, I think also writing in the first person, even in a field like economics, so you usually write in the third person or occasionally the first person plural. If you use personal narrative or try to rewrite things in a different style, it helps crystallize your understanding of the material in a way. I'm kind of looking over there because the person asked it. But it crystallizes your understanding, right? So if you could speak about the topic in a different voice than your academic training, it does something to your understanding about the material and your ability to present it to somebody else. Crystallize is the right word, but something.
I often use, as Ms. Pisanos said, one of the possible questions could be, what kind of writing do we ask our students to do? I'll often ask students to write creatively about mathematics because that's just a very different perspective on mathematics than they might otherwise have. And you can really uncover some new ideas writing a poem about math, or writing a short story, or inventing a board game that involves writing little cards or game pieces about mathematical subjects.
I think also on that, something when I was thinking about what to present today, I was going to talk about voice. So that's come out a few times, or voice or perspective. Just trying to find who you are within your field and what your style, I guess maybe is a better word for it, your style of writing is. So even in a field like economics that tends to be objective and a little bit removed, you still have a personal style, and this comes down to the kind of questions that you're asking about your world, your way of presenting the material, and things like that. And a lot of the ways, so for me it was a struggle to find my voice within the field, and over time through my graduate and undergraduate career, if I had to look back and see how I found my voice, so I'm an economist, right? But I think I found my voice by writing poetry, very bad poetry, but poetry, and writing creatively. So in a journal or just personal styles of writing, it really allowed me to, I guess, find myself, right? So find myself within the work and then ask questions. And then I also found it, when I was working at the United Nations, I'd write these policy briefs. So these would be long policy briefs about certain questions, like women's empowerment and paid labor, or something like that. And then part of my job there was that I would have to help write these policy reports and then translate them into different formats. So I would have to write an executive summary, for example, or I'd have to write an email convincing people to read it, or I'd have to then translate that material into a speech for somebody else to give, or talking points for a speech that somebody else would have to give, right? So it's all these different styles of writing related to one main body of work. And that really challenged me, right? To find my voice, find my style of writing, and to understand, what the heck is it that I'm writing about, right? So when you're writing in an email, it's way different than just presenting data and tables and writing up the results, right? So you have to convince people that they should read what you're writing, so you have to show excitement about it.
I hope it's okay for me to speak, but I also wonder if there's not this assumption. I think Anne talked about the assumption that when you write in the third person, you're automatically writing objectively. And I think that's an assumption. I mean, I think we can all think about pieces of writing that we've read that were written in the third person that were not very objective at all. And kind of, I wonder if the shift has to do with the fact that as academics, we're still human beings, right? That claim that Anne made in the beginning, right? That her professors are real human beings, and we do have personal experiences. And the first person, I think, acknowledges that we are human beings and we have personal experiences. And that doesn't that we can still write objectively while acknowledging ourselves as people, right? And this voice that Melissa's talked about as well.
And I think also, I was just talking with my students about this morning, because there was a question about, like, in the research paper, can I use first person? And I think that it's a little bit disingenuous to think that just using the third person means the argument is not still in some way in its original form based on your perspective, your opinion, right? Certainly, yes, you're going to set your biases aside. You're going to examine what is being said in those academic conversations. You're going to enter into those conversations and give your perspective. But in the case of papers that present an argument, in my opinion, there's sometimes little sense in pretending that you are not involved, right? That this idea somehow sprang up mysteriously and, oh, look, it's really interesting, and it's not mine because I'm trying to be objective, right? It's still yours, and so, you know, there's something powerful to claiming that and still being fair and, you know, still being, using your sources with integrity and presenting a valid argument.
A lot of this, getting back to science writing and the third person standard in a lot of science writing makes me think of, if any of you are looking at maybe doing a STEM major, you would do yourself a favor, I think, by picking up a book by this man named Thomas Kuhn back in the 1960s. He was a philosopher of science. He was trained as a physicist, but quickly turned to look at philosophy of science. He wrote this book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And it was a sort of groundbreaking work in philosophy of science because he really investigated the way in which science writing does a really good job of convincing people that scientific progress is inevitable. And we believe what we believe today because, of course we do. It builds inevitably on the stuff that came before. And there could be no other path because this is the truth, and so forth. And he kind of laid bare what has really happened by the way that science writing is done. It sort of ignores, we tend to ignore all of the false starts, all of the dead ends, all of the paths that were followed, and perhaps were at one time also considered inevitable. There were theories in physics and chemistry and mathematics in the 19th century and earlier too, but as recently as the 19th, 20th centuries, there were things that were held as sacrosanct. This is just the way things are. We know this because blah, blah, blah. That have now been, at least for now, proven incorrect because people weren't being skeptical enough. And part of the reason this sort of hoodwink was perpetrated is because science writing tends to make people think that this is inevitable. These ideas inevitably follow upon ideas that have come before. And I think Kuhn does a really good job, Kuhn, if you want to look it up. He does a really good job of sort of exposing science for what it is and this sort of this imposter that science writing has become.
We have time for maybe a couple more questions. Are there any other questions for the panelists?
Could you just introduce yourselves one more time?
Sure.
If I can write it down.
I'm Ann Jansen in the English department.
Okay, thank you.
And Patrick Balls in mathematics.
I'm Melissa Mahoney in economics.
And I'm Jason Wingert, Health and Wellness.
Thank you.
This is a question.
I was wondering if one were to have trouble like starting a paper or an essay, what strategies do you guys use to get rid of that block in your head?
Two come to mind for me very quickly. Keep it simple. So, first sentence. Science writing is great because the first sentence is always extraordinarily basic. For whatever reason, we've kind of created this culture or convention of having the very first sentence be very sort of blunt and something that almost everybody could understand. So I think that could apply to many works. In fact, in literature, some of the best books start with a very simple first sentence. So many memorable first sentences. So, but that's at least my second piece of advice, and don't put so much gravity into this. You can always come back to the first sentence. but it is important to get started. Another thing is you don't have to start with the first sentence, but just get started anywhere, and then you can always go back and edit. So editing really is the writer's friend, you know. I mean, that is an important part of the writing process, and I didn't appreciate that when I was an undergraduate. I just felt like I need to write this paper. I don't care how it gets done, I just need to write it. But if we start and give ourselves enough time, we can go back and start messing with it. We just need to start. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
So I maybe take the metaphor of writing as conversation a little too far as an incredibly social person, but I actually find that like sitting down and just having a conversation with my friends, or sometimes involving bribery with things like pizza, but other times just people who are interested in the same ideas. If I sit down and try to say what I'm thinking, and if a person is right there to ask me a question, and you can't just sit there silently for 10, I mean you could, but it'd be real awkward and uncomfortable if you sat there silently for like 10, 15 minutes trying to puzzle through it, finding the perfect wording when someone right in front of you has asked you a question. And so I find that if I can have these conversations, and in your cases, if it's for class, someone who's in the same class is ideal, right, because they're encountering some of the same material. And then you can really just actually have a conversation. If you have a smartphone, most of them are equipped with a free voice memo app. If you don't, you can check out audio recorders for free from the front desk of the library. But if you just record it and then you unload that burden of having to like take notes and you can just talk and you can just bounce the ideas around and start in that way. I like this idea of things crystallizing. In that way, your ideas can really start to take shape as you sort of have someone else to put pressure on certain parts of them, and as they ask you questions and you're forced to actually respond, right? I find that that can be really helpful. And in a different, more structured method, if you're really feeling stuck, and part of it is because you just have so much to say and you're unsure of where to start, sometimes I make like a little, it almost looks like a family tree, but it's like a hierarchy of ideas, and I try to figure out, like I list out all the main ideas or themes that I'm trying to encounter or trying to address in this piece of writing. And then I try to figure out like which ones are like the big ideas, like which one's like the main one, like this is the overall topic of my paper. Okay, monsters. Okay, and then what are the moving parts under that? Well, monsters, well, I'm looking at indigenous literature, and I'm looking at, ideas of community and family, and I'm looking at humor. And are those ideas all on equal footing, or are maybe some of them subordinate to others? And in that way, then you can sort of make this little visual representation that shows you like, oh, that's my main idea, and this idea is just a subplot under that, and under that there are these other subplots, and that can help you if you're really just struggling to figure out like what is my idea, because I have a lot to say, but I can't figure out where to start. So that's another sort of more organized method of going about things.
I heard Dr. Winger mention something in passing earlier that I often use, so we just use free writing. Just sit down and write without stopping, without picking your pen up, without taking your fingers from the keyboard. Don't worry about the editing, that will come later.
Yeah.
You'll lose a lot of ideas if you stop and pause and let your internal editor that's always sitting there at a little desk, like, shutting down all these ideas before they even start. So just writing without stopping sometimes helps you get those out.
I think these are all great ideas, and I second all of them, and I've used all of them in my writing process. Something else I can contribute is sometimes when I'm really stuck, I take a break and I go for a walk, and I bring a little notebook or my smartphone. I try not to bring my smartphone because then you have all the other things to distract you, but like a notebook and a pen, put in my back pocket, and I go for a walk. And I try to tell myself the story of so it's kind of like a conversation, but I'm having it with myself. And try to tell myself the story of what I'm working on, and then I just, when those moments come, I write down a little note. Oh, this was it. Oh, this was it. Just try to write down little notes as I go along, and I find that helps. I haven't done it before. I practice a lot of yoga, so I'll practice yoga at home. I'll keep a little notepad next to my mat, go through my practice, and try to tell myself, sort of like my mantra or my meditation is trying to tell myself the story of what I'm writing, and I just write down the notes beside me, and I find that movement helps also with kind of getting the mind working.
Maybe one more question. If there is one. Or not. This has been wonderful. Thank you all.